Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran and it is time to do an Outlaw Rogue PvE guide. Now I'm going to be doing two Outlaw Rogue PvE guides, or at least two, for this patch 8.3. We're first going to do a beginner's guide for Outlaw Rogues for anybody who is just starting out Outlaw, or maybe anybody who's been playing the spec and is just trying to figure their way out into this brand new environment that we find ourselves in patch 8.3. Outlaw is going to be radically changing with better gear in this patch in particular, which is why I want to make two guides. The better gear is going to use essences that your regular Outlaw that's trying out in patch 8.3 right now just would have zero use for. So for me it makes sense to separate it into two separate guides after I have the new gear and I'm able to test it for myself and then show you guys the most up-to-date information possible. So let's dive into the opening for the patch 8.3 Outlaw guides, the beginnings of what's it like to start out on your rogue. For this video we'll be using raid bots for a majority of our sims, and you guys should really start using sims if you want to get into some of the more nitty gritty rogue PvE content. Sims help you figure out your best essences, talents, stats depending on gear. Every rogue is different depending whether you have a lot of gear or not a lot. So we'll be using sims in order to figure out majority of the stuff, and you guys should be using sims on your rogue to get the most accurate information. So when it comes to the talents for the Outlaw Rogue, we're going to be focusing on single target, but I will give you guys alternatives for talents that you might want to run if you are in an AoE situation. And the first rogue quick draw ends up just being the stronger choice than Weapon Master or Ghosted Strike. There might be some builds later down the line where these could be decent, but by the end of this expansion it looks like quick draw is going to be the go-to. Level 30, honestly you can go with any one of them, but I like the extra range you get on acrobatic strikes. You're able to avoid mechanics that would otherwise hurt you, like fires on the ground or maybe corruption effects that might get in your way, while also being able to reach boss. This also is great when you're using in dungeons because it gives you a wider range of your blade flurry. Level 45, right now most Outlaw Rogues are running Deeper Stratagem. Vigor used to be the go-to, but with the essences we have right now and with better gear and more stats like haste, we're able to get far more energy out and are able to get more value out of it with Deeper Strat. Level 60, Cheat Death is the go-to. A lot of people run it because it is the kind of catch-all, great talent. If you, let's say, mess up a mechanic and would normally die, Cheat Death would catch you and make sure you keep on trucking. 75, I think Prayer in the Weak is the only viable option. Like, none of these really work inside of raids, but inside of dungeons, Prayer in the Weak with all those between the eyes you get to put out, you do increase the amount of damage an enemy takes by 10%, so your allies can finish more faster. A level 90 right now, Alacrity and Loaded Dice are kind of... Alacrity has been the go-to for the longest. Slicing Dice is not even worth considering. Loaded Dice could be a viable option with certain traits. Of course, it's worth simming it, but generally Alacrity a little better, though there's potential for Loaded Dice. A level 100, generally in single target, Blade Rush is the go-to. It gives you energy, gives you movement speed. It also gets cut down by your common point spenders. You have Killing Spree, which used to be good, but as of right now, it's kind of fallen out of meta. There might be certain fights where Killing Spree is insanely good, but right now, there's traits that benefit us for better AoE damage, and Killing Spree doesn't play with those traits. Dance Still is the go-to if you're going to have any fights, like in a raid, where you'll be able to AoE the enemy and cleave for quite a considerable amount of time. As soon as this fight is all single target, nothing else to hit, or mostly focuses on single target output, Blade Rush is the go-to. Dance Still does provide great AoE and will be the go-to when we go into dungeons. For traits, I always get questions, which traits would an Outlaw Rogue want? And the Wowhead website actually has a really good explanation for some of the traits that are recommended. And in the current introduction, I do agree with the setup. You basically want to stack as many dead shots and ace up your sleeve as you can. As many as you want. If you can get all the way up to a 3 dead shot and 3 ace up your sleeve, you actually get yourself a decent single target build. However, Brigand's Blitz is also another decent one. You can go with this one if you do get it in your gear, but you should always have one Keep Your Wits about you. Even in single target, Keep Your Wits doesn't really pull you back that much from pure single target fights, and if you're someone who doesn't want to have multiple different sets, Keep Your Wits will be the mandatory trait you will need for any cleave, 2 target, 3 target, or multi-AoE situations. So generally I like to stack as many dead shots and ace up your sleeve as I can, usually 1 Brigand's Blitz and 1 Keep Your Wits. At least this is the build you should be running at the very beginning as you're starting out with your rogue. Let's talk about our essences. And our essences are going to change as we get more gear for our rogues. But right now, currently, if you are just starting out with this starter guide, I'll talk about essences that are viable and good. However, if you are ever not sure which essences you should run, always sim, sim, and sim some more. So for single target, pure output, Crucible Flame ends up being a really good essence in terms of just output for single target. Another essence that's great is also Condensed Life Force. The Rock Boy is still viable even though after it got nerfed, and it is a great essence if you did a raid in the Eternal Palace. If you are just starting out with your rogue, maybe like a brand new player, Breath of the Dying actually offers quite a bit of single target. It's not the strongest essence I've ever seen in my life, but as we do get higher ranks of it, it is going to become viable, and I think it's always going to be a great passive because of the corruption resistance, but also the damage that it's able to put out. It's quite consistent. Now, when it comes to dealing with essences in your passives, Memory of Lucid Dreams, especially at rank 3, is kind of like a must-have. The energy give back that it gives you is nice and lets you play things like Deeper Stratagem for more common points with the energy refund, plus the versatility it grants you is a damage plus. Some of the other ones that are also good passives are Conflict and Strife is great when it comes to the extra versatility you bring up, especially if you can get it to rank 3 so you can get more stacks of it. Another one that's also good is Vision of Perfection, cutting down the cooldown of Adrenaline Rush. This one will become a lot more valuable as the expansion goes on and you get a lot more traits. If you have something else in your middle slot, Crucible Flame is also a great passive as well if you end up running, let's say, Rock Boy. World Vein Resonance can also be good as a passive if your other allies are using it as well. This one has become a lot more powerful as of recently. And some of the other ones that might be good as a passive, Spark of Inspiration or Formless Void if you do not have Breath of the Dying and if they are simming better. But of course, if you are ever not sure, it's always a good idea to sim all of your essences because you never really know which one is going to end up being good for your build. Like right now, my build is more leaning towards World Vein Resonance with the gear that I have. I am kind of breaking away from Crucible Flame. I'm getting to the point where Vision of Perfection is great, not in just AoE situations. So always sim your character to find out what the game might recommend best for you. But what stats should you stack on your Outlaw Rogue? The stats are going to vary depending on the build, depending on how much gear you have. But this is a snapshot of my rogue stats with the sim website. There's a nice nifty section for stat weights, which look at the stats that you need and which weights are not that great for you. Right now, for my rogue, a better weapon is going to be a massive upgrade. Critical strike and versatility are king. Haste is not too terrible, but like mastery, should mostly be avoided. Agility is scaling a lot less, so a trinket with base versatility is going to be more valuable than a trinket with massive amounts of agility. At least that's how my rogue stands right now. Now, everybody's rogue is going to be different, but for the most part, critical strike and versatility are going to be your bread and butter. I generally like to keep them a fair amount of both, but eventually with better gear, critical strike starts to become a lot more favorable than versatility. Haste is not really all that important, but I would keep somewhere between 11 to 14% haste at all times in your rogue, so your playstyle doesn't feel too slow, but no more than 14 because it starts to lose value after that. And try to avoid mastery like the plague. If you do get a piece of gear that's an upgrade, and it does have mastery on it, it doesn't mean the end of the world. You should sim your character and see if it still is an upgrade for your character. But the general rule of thumb is try to avoid mastery and anything that gives you mastery, particularly on Outlaw Rogue. Maybe in the next expansion we might be able to get a better mastery, but as of right now, it's definitely not worth stacking. And now it comes to the rotation. I get a lot of questions about the Outlaw Rogue rotation, and if you're new to the spec, it can definitely feel daunting. I mean, you have to juggle a bunch of different buffs, and there's so many common points and procs, and how do you deal with all of this? Which buffs do you keep? Should you ever reroll? Is there a point you shouldn't reroll? The buff mechanic for Outlaw Rogue is the biggest limiter for a lot of people. For some people, they just cannot, for the life of them, deal with it. So if the buff mechanic for Outlaw Rogue, honestly, if it's just you struggle with it, and if it's the worst thing you've ever played with, I think it's a good idea to maybe try another spec. Assassination is a far easier spec to get into. It's a lot more simple, straightforward. But if you don't mind the buff mechanic of Outlaw with a bit of RNG that it comes with, this spec is a great spec to play. It feels awesome, but the rotation is very specific. However, to make this video easier, I did make an overlay for you guys to come back to if you ever get confused with the rotation. This is the overlay. Opener is very simple. You open up with an ambush, vanish, ambush, into a blade rush if you're talented, which will allow you to build up a little bit extra common points. And the base rotation of the spec is build common points with Sinister Strike and Pistol Shot. Instead of actually having the abilities themselves, I have icons, so hopefully it'll make it easy for you guys to figure out. Pistol shots do have procs, and they can proc off of Sinister Strikes. A Sinister Strike has a chance to hit an enemy twice, which will generate 2 combo points or more if you have a right buff from Roll the Bones. And then if that happens, you get an extra proc of Pistol Shot, which will be half off on energy, and it'll do a little bit extra damage. Use Pistol Shot procs immediately as long as you don't overcap on combo points. Once you have enough combo points, you need to spend them on something. So try to spend combo points at 6 combo points, but use 5 if you have a Pistol Shot proc or if one of the buffs like Broadsides is present. Spending combo points is really going to be all about a priority. The first priority to use your combo points on will be to get a buff. It doesn't matter what kind of buffs you get from Roll the Bones, just Roll the Bones to get any kind of buffs. Next priority when you build combo points is to use Between the Eyes if you are running a Saber Sleeve or Deadshot in your traits, which you should be, so this ability should be put on cooldown immediately. Afterwards, build up combo points and try to see if you can roll yourself a good buff. That can be Ruthless Precision, or the Shark buff as I call it, any 2 buff combo, or any 5 buff combo. Once you have achieved a good buff, you can build combo points and use Dispatch as a filler. But remember to always use Between the Eyes if that ever comes off of cooldown. And if you're about to lose out on any good buffs, you should re-roll them. They do have a bit of pandemic, so let's say if you have 10 seconds left on a buff, and you re-roll, those 10 seconds will be added into the next buff. And if you get a really good one, that means 10 seconds longer that you'll have a good buff to help you do more damage. If you're in a situation where you're doing AoE, then you should be pressing Blade Flurry on your Outlaw Rogue whenever possible. I don't have Blade Flurry added into this rotation because essentially when you press Blade Flurry, you don't change your rotation. You're still doing single target to primary enemy, but Blade Flurry creates AoE cleave for your rogue, hitting every enemy around you. So it's really simple to play. Now the playstyle seems really simple, but definitely takes a little bit of practice to get used to, but I do hope you guys find this overlay helpful. And that's going to be everything you need to start out your Outlaw Rogue in patch 8.3. I'll make a more detailed expert guide at a later time once I'm able to collect the gear you need in order to make the new builds work. But until then, this should get you guys started and should even be viable if you wanna, for any reason, face off against Heroic N'Zoth, whether you want to get the mount or simply the glory of Ahead of the Curve. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see all of you guys in another video.